Just make sure you have pants on.
All right, Mr.
Get
Chair,
up.
you are now live.
Thank you. Can I call this meeting to order? And can we have the roll call?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Andrew Hare,
Here.
Benjamin Mednick,
Here.
Eileen Leahy,
Here.
Jeffrey Duran,
Here.
Lawrence Harris Jr.,
Here.
Minor Carter. No. Paul Rankin,
Here.
Robert Tufts,
Here.
and Ron Schneider.
Here.
Call is complete.
Thank you. We have an agenda, and I'm going to jump down to the third point. We've done the second. Approval of the minutes. As I was looking at them, we have both the approval for the April 20th and the May 6th, 2021 minutes. Do we have any comments on either of those?
No, I'll move, or there being no objection, I'll move to approve both sets of minutes.
Good.
Second.
Any opposed? And none opposed. The minutes are approved. Public testimony. This is the placeholder. So we will move on to our fifth item, which is
Andy, I just
Yes.
want to make sure that people know that there was a web form submitted for the meeting tonight that was posted on, was sent to the group, and it is on our email. And I sent out a notice earlier today, just letting people know that it's there. So I think we should just make sure everybody's aware that it's there and they should read it. It concerns partisan versus nonpartisan elections.
Okay. Okay, moving on to item 5, which is the executive committee report. Eileen, I believe did we circulate the minutes of the executive committee?
We didn't. We haven't been circulating them.
We have
I
not.
can.
Is there interest in those minutes? We do take minutes, but as we've said 2 or 3 meetings ago, the purpose of those particular meetings is just to provide continuity from commission meeting to commission meeting. And we don't act on anything other than just trying to make sure that any loose ends do get addressed. If somebody's committed to something, or if we've committed to something, we in fact get it done. But would there be interest in? Yes.
Since we do have a tight timeline, especially with that interim report, and since we continue to do things remotely, I'd be interested in seeing it if you, at the executive committee level, are dealing with ways to maintain our timeline and keep us organized and, provide interim direction from meeting to meeting.
Okay.
If you're not covering that, then, but I think that would be a very useful role for the executive committee.
I'd like to add, Ben, that's a perfect segue into an issue that Eileen raised probably at the 2/3 mark of the last executive committee, which was the timeline. And one of the things we did discuss in that was the next 1, 2, 3, 4 meetings, what we would, in a very broad sense, what we'd like to accomplish in the next 4. So I guess at the risk of putting Eileen on the spot, I've got the notes in front of me, but Eileen, would you be willing, or can you go through that timeline element? And then I'm going to follow up with Ben's request. If we need a motion, we can actually vote on them. But to share those minutes.
Okay. Well, in regards to the notes, I agree. I think we should just, if not circulate them, at least post them on the Google Drive, since we're asking all the committees to have them. So
Right.
I'm happy to go ahead. There's been I can't remember how many we have, but I'll just go ahead and post those
Okay,
on the Google Drive. There is a folder for executive committee along with the calendar. So I can go ahead and do that. The timeline we discussed is in the most recent notes, which have already been done. It's basically looking at this meeting in terms of starting our initial group reports. Then our next meeting, which I think is June
June
1st,
June 3rd.
June 3rd would be additional reports, and then trying to finalize those reports and come up with recommendations for further actions. The meeting after that, I want to say is, I don't have the dates in front of me, June
15th, June 15th.
15th. Again, that would be continued looking at what we're working on now, but also begin drafting what needs to be done for the midterm report and also that presentation. And the work session is, then I think our next one's July 1st. That would be
Yes.
finalizing the presentation and the midterm report. And then July 15th would be the work session.
Right. I think the key thing that and you'll see this in the minutes, but the key thing that we came out was that on the 3rd, this is the next meeting we're going to have, we're trying to at least get some initial proposals among the work groups that are going to report at least this evening, but also get some proposals if we can. On the 15th, which is 2 meetings from tonight, is, and Eileen did mention this, but I would like to emphasize it, is to get drafts, to actually get something in writing, get something that we can read and edit and comment. And this is trying to lead up to the meeting after that, which will be 3 meetings from now, which is the finalized draft. So as you can see, it's a bit of a succession to try to socialize a lot tonight, formalize a lot next meeting, draft a lot the meeting after that, and finalize it. So those are essentially the 4 steps between now, or the 4 meetings between now and the
Right.
1st of July.
And I think also by the next meeting, we were really hoping that if you're still in the information gathering mode of talking to people, doing research, getting all that, that's going to be completed so that it can be incorporated into the recommendations. So, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but it is in the minutes, which I'll post tonight. That was really the bulk of what we discussed at the executive committee meeting. At least all that I was going to kind of bring up, at least for this
Right.
one.
I think one of the things that did come up in the executive committee, and the reason why I put an email out a few days after we met, was the fact that we weren't sure whether we had actually articulated these milestones, and we've discussed them, but we're not sure whether we were that clear about them. And so that was the purpose of me trying to put that email out. And then as you'll see, if you take a peek at those minutes, you'll see the 4 or 5 steps, and specifically what hopefully we'll try to accomplish between now and the 1st. Actually, it's the 15th of July, but the 1st of July, we're trying to finalize a draft if we can. Any comments? Any questions? Okay, if I could go on to item 6, which is the presentation. I see Jacqueline Lee has joined us.
Do we have outreach? Do we have a committee report from outreach?
Sort of a semi-committee report, meaning that the committee hasn't really met.
Okay.
Probably doing some stuff that ought to be talked about a little bit, and Jeff and I'll jump in. I'll just reiterate a couple of things, talk about a couple of things. We had talked at the last meeting about beginning sort of a more formalized outreach to specific groups or individuals in the city. I did reach out to Mitchell Stevenson. She sent me a list with the idea of obtaining a list of important, I guess, if you will, or leading community groups. She did send me a list, but in looking it over and in talking briefly with Eileen, and you can elaborate a bit, Eileen, on this, there are some community groups that are, one would consider leading groups that are not even on that list. So it's by far not something that is fully developed at this point in time. So if I can say, Eileen, if I'm permitted here, you're going to sort of work on that a little bit.
Right. I was looking at the list. A large part of the list are really home associations or community tenant associations. So I was trying to pull out two from each ward that seem to be more, at least on my radar, as far as being more involved in some diversity. So for instance, I think in Ward 1, it was the Ward 1 Residents Association and then the Bloomsbury Square Association. Certainly in Ward 3, it was looking at the Greater Parole Improvement Association, and, might send out this as a draft ahead of time and say to people if there's others they think to be there. But I was kind of surprised in some areas, for instance, Ward 7, all they have at least listed on this list is home associations or apartment dwelling associations. So I'm not quite sure that's where we're going, but I'll see if I can dig some other ones up.
I was thinking, if you'll indulge me, Andy, I was just thinking, Eileen, maybe the best thing to do would be to send it out to everybody in this group and just say, if you think somebody needs to be contacted, put them on this list,
Mhm.
and then we'll go about our business.
Yeah.
From there. So that would be one. I did have a chance to reach out to Lawrence. Thank you, Lawrence, for getting back so fast. He has already set up a meeting with the Greater Parole Right organization.
Yes, that's correct, Paul.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that.
Paul, I might have to correct the date on that. I think I gave you the 25th, but actually maybe the 26th, but I'll double check and get back to you on that.
That'd be great. And I guess a question at the end of this to you, Andy, or whatever, we had sort of talked about the idea of limiting the number of people. We don't want to all jump on the Greater Parole or any of the other organizations, but we do want to, have a couple representatives from this group talk to each of these organizations to the extent that we're invited. So that may be something that you want to think about, sort of how we divvy up the largesse there. So that's good. We also, I just finished a PowerPoint, which you had asked me to do at the last meeting. I didn't get around to it, frankly, until a day or so ago. I have not distributed that to anybody except Eileen and Andy, who just saw it literally earlier. I do want everybody's comments on that. The theory of the PowerPoint is exactly what Andy had talked about at the last meeting, which was to sort of provide a general introduction to anyone who's going to any of these groups. So, very quick, to the point. Here's who we are, here's what we're doing, here's why we're out seeking your views on changes to the charter. So once we finalize that, that'll be available to everybody, or you can reject it and somebody else can do it. Either way, fine by me. And then we do want to set up meetings with individual members of the city council, mayor, and city manager at the very least. And of course, tonight we're going to hear a bit of a presentation from Jackie and Mr. Lyles. That's it. Jeff, or any of you got anything else?
Nothing to add.
I have a question. Did you all want to, I have gotten an appointment with the mayor. Also, Mike Lyles has given me some times and dates, and the city clerk has given me some times and dates. Do you want to discuss that now, Andy, or just send that out as an email and find out what interest people have?
Let's have just at least a short discussion on that, because I know we talked briefly about this at the executive committee meeting last week. And this is a personal view, just in terms of how productive these meetings can be, personal from the experience that I've had over the years that I've done these kinds of things. And the personal view is this: I think if you can keep the meeting small, you will get a lot more candor from whoever you're meeting with. And I think oftentimes when you pack a meeting with a half a dozen or a dozen people, then all of a sudden everybody goes on remote control and everybody's going to say what they want to say or think they should say. So I think it becomes less productive. So I'd like to at least pose that as a discussion topic, just maybe for the next minute or so, what the general views of the commission are in terms of broad meetings where we have 5 or 6 of us versus possibly just having 1 or at the most 2 of us. That's it. And when I say us, I mean the royal us. I mean, I think we should spread this around as broadly as we possibly can. Yes, Ben?
We had talked 2 meetings ago about organizing our thoughts for these types of meetings. I think we discussed it at 2 levels. One was general questions or general inquiry, and then more specific. And I think at one point we were talking about coming up with that standardized approach, right? So that any meeting that we held would sort of have a commonality in terms of the data that we were gathering. I don't know that we pursued it that much, but it was a topic at one point. I would be totally comfortable with 1 or 2 person meetings if I knew that, there was at least a standard a set of topics or questions that reflected this whole group that was going to be addressed at that meeting. I think that's totally reasonable. And I'll work by the negative and say I will opt out of meeting with the politicians, but I would totally volunteer to meet with the community groups.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about overcrowding for me.
Okay. Other thoughts? Paul?
My only add-on to what Ben had to say, I agree with you generally that smaller is better probably, because who has the time in every case. I love the idea of spreading it around because I think that's really important. And lastly, I think everybody who does meet with anybody ought to produce at least a set of bullet points that imply outcome or that describe the outcome.
Ron, was that agreement or do you, Eileen?
I was just asking, I'm agreeing with Ben as far as the talking points, and I think outreach, are you all still working on that to do those talking points, or if you all aren't, where are they going to come from?
We have failed
On the
miserably.
spot. What?
We have failed miserably. To the outreach, you guys promised to work with me in the next couple of days.
I believe that we may have already started on that path. We just don't realize it. I think after we talk about maybe some of our initial views from the various article teams that we broke up into last meeting, in addition to understanding that we're going to really farm out the work here in smaller groups, I bet you by the end of tonight, we could very easily come up with a consensus of those bullet points, whether we talk it out now or get it onto a document over the next few days. I bet you we're not too far off from getting there because of work we've already done. I think it has to happen after tonight's conversation, though. Just my thought.
Okay. We in agreement on that? That maybe, okay, good. In the next few days, what we'll do is we'll have those talking points.
Do you want me also to send out a sign-up sheet for who wants to talk with who? And I think if you can follow what your group is looking at, that would be helpful. So I'll send that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Any other thoughts on this particular topic, which is outreach and the substance of what we're going to talk about?
Andy, I just have more of a question than a comment. So as we think about outreach, my assumption was outreach was going to be all about trying to drive some interest, actually leveraging the PowerPoint that Paul put together as kind of a guide. Are we assuming that outreach is also going to include some of the points that come up tonight that are brought up by the various groups? Trying to figure out what outreach means. Is outreach, hey, we're gonna, public, we want you to be aware that there's this charter revision process that the city is going through. This is why, this is what the process is, or is it, we're going through this process, we've come up with some ideas about how to revise it. These are the ideas, and we're going to float them out to the broader public.
I was under the view that it was possibly both of those, meaning that you have to explain, because there are going to be some people that just flat out don't understand what's going on, why we're even in front of them. And I'm not talking about the politicians as much as I am other kinds of people that we would talk to. So that's the first thing, just explain who we are. So you essentially make the bed that you're about to sleep in. Then the second bit would be, and this is more a personal view, is what is on their mind? Now, I know that's somewhat of a loaded question, but I was hoping that if we start collecting information as a collective group, there might be some common threads that we start to learn, that people have these kinds of issues that they would like, if they understand what we're doing, they understand what the charter is, then they can all of a sudden start to see, maybe this is a good opportunity to start. I'm not talking about the minutiae. I'm not talking about the small, it shouldn't be a grievance opportunity as much as it is, how do you craft a framework? How do you craft a structure? And if you can get people to open up, then you might learn something that says this is important. Ben.
But to your point, Andy, I think when we go out there, and it's very important to go out there, we are going to get the minutia, and we're probably going to get a lot of opinions on things that are probably more appropriate for the code. And so I think one of the most important activities that this group can do is interpret the minutia and the code requests that we're invariably going to get out there.
Okay.
Into going back to our first meeting, the broader vision, if you will, because the charter really, I think we've all come to an agreement, is much more of or could be more of a visionary structural document from which the code flows. I think that would be a tremendous service to the city, to be able to interpret the minutia that we hear back into a larger vision that is appropriate for the structure of the charter. The other thing that I'd say is, to your point, Andy, about the dual role here, explaining the charter, but then asking for feedback on it. The outreach is 100% necessary because, as we said from day one, this is we're not legislating here.
No, you're right. Yeah.
We're serving. So as much as we bring a lot of ideas, and my fear is that you only bring your own ideas, I think we have a obligation to report back, if you will, from the people of the city. So.
Sure. I think you have very good points. Other comments? Okay. So do we have I guess a fairly good understanding of this particular part? I think this is a very important part. And I think there's one thing we didn't mention, and I'll try to make it brief because we have a fair amount to cover for the balance of this meeting. And that is that I mentioned that there were, of the potentially 5 meetings that we're going to have over the next, between now and the 15th of July. I think one of the things that I would like to see thrust into each of those meetings is what we're learning in the outreach. So not only are we talking about the charter, but we're talking about what we're finding out. So it will hopefully will be, and maybe this is the benchmark, this will be the marriage that we're hopefully getting in terms of what is on people's minds. I'm always fascinated by what is on, what motivates people. What's the incentive they have to just be who they are? So with that, I think what we should do now, or if you allow me to do it, I think we'll move on to item 6 in the agenda. Eileen is always our master of the agenda, but I'm assuming I can move on to item 6, which is a presentation in terms of the legislative process. Now, at the risk of maybe being a touch provocative, I'll give you a 2-sentence background of why this presentation is being requested this evening. And that is that a question was raised is, what is the process with which an amendment can be passed for the charter? How can the charter be amended? And if you're Machiavellian, like sometimes I am, does for example, the council have the right to pass an amendment to eliminate the mayor? And, if things got a little uncomfortable. And so the point is, I think we really should understand, what does it take to amend? And during the last Exco, I was trying to at least give some of my philosophies on how governance structures should work. And the ease with which something could be changed should be the exact opposite of the influence of that change. They should be absolutely inversely against each other. And the example I used during the Exco was, I'm still in shock by Britain leaving the European Common Market. Because it was one vote, a simple majority, and that will change Great Britain to potentially Little Britain. And that's something you don't want in governance. It's allowing somebody to be able to make radical changes without some governance balance. So anyway, with that, I just wanted to at least paint the picture of why we are asking for this presentation. Jacqueline, I see you're here, and Mike Lyles is here. I leave it to the two of you if you would like to share your thoughts and your wisdom.
Sorry.
Jacqueline, go ahead,
Yeah.
Jacqueline.
I invited Mike here because you had asked a couple of questions that were more of advisory than just procedural. So if you have key questions that you are interested in, as far as the amendment process, yes, it is a simple majority vote. And the charter amendment deadline for this year, if a member of the city council wanted to introduce a charter amendment, would be June 14th because of the election year deadlines.
So that's pretty simple. Are there any
Okay.
other questions related to that?
A bunch of them.
Or do you want my impression of the whole thing?
Yes, definitely.
My
Please.
impression of this, having been on a city council before in elective office, it strikes me, and a constitutional lawyer, strikes me odd that the charter is as easy to modify as the code. That's the first thing that I noticed about the city's charter. It requires, one, a simple majority as opposed to some kind of super majority or unanimity. And two, there's a charter review commission that also changes or suggests changes to the charter. So my question as a new person to this city is, why is it so easy? And I suggest that it should not be as easy, either through some kind of supermajority or some kind of process that extends the time period for charter changes, like every 10 years upon the decennial. So if they've got a charter commission that suggests changes, maybe all charter changes should come at that time, and including the things that come from or emanate from the council. That's my, and then there should be some kind of supermajority, and if need be, or if you see fit to it, certain kinds of changes to the charter should come through some kind of referenda process where the city is involved, electorate's involved, and those charter changes go to the community. A lot of charter governments operate that way now throughout the state of Maryland. And I'm speaking more about counties and some of the larger cities. Yes, sir.
Kenny, or Mike, first of all, thanks for coming.
No problem.
Appreciate you taking time out of the day. Right, my understanding is that the process is also at least partially covered by state requirements, state codes, the state code that puts certain, both limitations and authorizations that make it as easy as it is right now. Are you suggesting that what we ought to be looking at is, well, first of all, can we simply make a change and say all further, as it were, assuming the county council passes it, et cetera, all further changes to the county, to the charter have to be made by supermajority of the city council?
You, as the commission, your job is to make suggestions and recommendations for changes to the charter. You don't have the power to make the changes. Only the council has the power to make the changes. So per the code and per the charter, your job is to draft changes and recommend policy changes that would be charter changes to the council. They would then meet and confer and decide whether to accept or reject any of your recommendations.
Second question, what's the format that you would recommend our recommendations take? Are they general paragraphs of intent, or are they specific legislative, or in this case, charter language changes?
Well, I think in the interest of time, even though the charter or the code suggests that your changes be drafted in addition to your recommendations, I don't know if we have time to draft your charter changes, but we would try to draft them with you. That's why Jacqueline has been assigned to come and confer with you. But assuming we didn't have time to draft a full charter change, the suggestions would be just your recommendations still have to get into a report. And whether you draft those or not, I think it's sufficient, legally sufficient, for you to come up with a report that recommends changes to the charter or no changes to the charter.
Sorry to hog the floor. One further question to you. So our reports due, let's call it September 15th, I forget, but call it about. So reports made in an appropriate form. We submit it to the city. Now we're in an election year. If you can comment, what's the expectation of who's going to, we know who's going to receive it, it'll be the current city council, but do they have time to act on it in an election year, or does this shift forward? Okay. No,
anything that you would recommend, well, any changes to the code have to happen before a certain period of a date in June. I can't remember the exact date, but all changes to the code have to happen before a certain date by code, right? So there's an end date for this term, this 4-year term for the council members, and all changes have to be done before this date in June. Because you've been extended in September, there's no way that they would have any time to do anything, because after August, there's really no more legislative, it means one legislative month, and then that's it. And usually when their code or charter changes, there are time frames and committees and commissions that things have to go to, and there are periods for public hearing and open session. That could take 3 or 4 months. And so there's no way at all that you could get something to them in September and they'd be able to do it before November.
But Mike, just to close out that point, we would still have the opportunity in the next council with the next elected body they would address those. They're not going to toss them away.
Well, yeah, see, the council is the council. The council is not the individual named in people who sit in those chairs, right? So okay. The council goes forever. So think about it that way. The council, who's in the chairs, the council is the council. Okay. And they have the jobs to do, and your recommendations go to the council, not to any individual named officers of the city. Think you have another question, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Rob.
This one, like everyone else said, thank you for taking your time to come out here and join us this evening. Appreciate it. And this came up in the discussion earlier about, and what language, what sort of changes would be considered code versus charter. There are some things that maybe are in the code now. Can you elevate maybe some language that's in the code to like a charter status or vice versa? I don't know if I'm explaining this properly. But there's certain things like about how elections are held that are specifically stated in the charter, and then there's kind of more detailed, you know, in the code. And so I'm wondering if some of those detailed things, if we'd be able to graduate it up to like the charter level, let's say.
Yeah, okay, so let me explain what the charter is supposed to be providing to the public. The charter is supposed to provide the authority to do a thing, right? The power to do a thing. That then the thing, actually doing the thing, is where you put it in the code. So the city shall have the authority to plant trees. That's in the charter. Now, where do trees go when the city decides to plant them, and who does the planting and who makes the decision about where they go? That would be, and then what do people in the community get to do about the tree planted in the wrong place? So that would all go in the code. Then, as we have suggested, there's a place for regulation. The trees have to be 10 feet tall and no higher. They have to be mix of female and male trees. They must go on both sides of the road. If a person plants a tree on behalf of the city, this is when they have to plant it, right? Those would be regulations. So charter, where the power and authority to act by the government. Code, the power and authority of the citizens to interrelate or interact with the city government, and what are the public and the government's limitations in carrying out the authority so granted. And then regulations, the detail about how the authority so granted and the interrelationship so explained, how that gets carried out, implemented, if you will.
And if I might add to that, Mike, the charter is generally the authority that's granted by the state to the cities, to municipalities.
Yeah, but here's the thing: the state code provides that governments other than the state can be formed. They can take various types of forms, if you will. They can be counties, and there are only a certain number of those. So they have to be listed in the state law. You can have a city or what's called a municipal government, and that can take different forms. And we are what's called a charter form of government, meaning the state has said that our powers emanate for the government itself through a charter that we create. And they have in the state law a very broad prescription for what that looks like. And in that charter, we can decide that we will have a council, officers, mayors, city managers, or none of it, right? So the state law really just says you can form, and this is how you can form in these formations. But other than that, it really, and it does have some broad categories of things that these municipal and county governments can't do. But generally, they kind of leave us alone to do what we want to do. But there are some things that we are prohibited from doing. But most things we can do. And if we are going to do anything in the charter and the code, we have to always go back to the state law to make sure that we've been granted that specific authority. Because if we haven't been granted that specific authority, we can't do it. For instance, we can grant liquor licenses. We can register people who own restaurants, and we can license them to sell liquor. That is a state power that the state has delegated to municipalities and to counties to act on the state's behalf. To tax, but only to tax in certain situations. We can't do all the kinds of taxes that the state can do, but we can establish a real property tax, for instance. That's specifically set out in the state law. But we can't tax income at the city level because it's not stated specifically that we can. So that's kind of a basic rundown of how that works.
One of the questions I had when I was reading the charter was, in public safety is often a big issue. I'm thinking specifically about police. Is that the kind of thing, I'm trying to think of the distinction between how, for example, the county police interacts with the Annapolis police and how that distinct, because I could see that getting very, very complicated in terms of, where does one hand off to the next? And I'm not talking about an incident that's happened. I'm not talking about, you're in the middle of a crime and therefore you've got to be, I'm talking about really the broad brush. And usually the law is quite clear in terms of how coordination works, especially cross-jurisdictional coordination, which it sounds like where you have the difference between the county. And then fire, something like, seems like there's many fire departments. So these are in the whole realm of public safety. Is that something that the charter should be clear about in terms of this is the city's responsibility and this is the county's responsibility?
Not necessarily, because the state law provides that municipalities of our type can exercise public safety authority, including fire and police. And so we have the ability to create police departments, but that goes along with our ability to oversee the public health and safety and welfare, because nothing in the state code says you can have a police department. It just says you are generally authorized to create a city and government that oversees and enhances the public safety, health, and welfare of its citizens. And so policing kind of goes with that. It's just part and parcel of public safety, along with fire. Now, as the organizations relate to county and state, that's all done by agreement, not anything in the code or in the charter. If we start a police department and the county has a police department, we would likely, the county would likely say, great, you can have those streets. We don't have to police those streets. And there would be some kind of agreement that we would have that the county would adhere to.
Okay. So that's actually then a third element. So you actually have side agreements between jurisdictions.
Yes, and yeah,
work those things out.
Yeah, the mutual aid agreements. Once we start our police department, there's nothing to do with the county other than let the county know we started a police department. These are our boundaries, and you don't have to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And the county is very happy not to have to do it, believe me. But we have mutual aid agreements that describe what is handed off to the county that we don't do. For instance, we don't do certain types of investigations, and we don't have a big enough jail. I don't even think we have a jail, but we may have a holding cell, but a lot of other law enforcement activities are handed off to other agencies, municipal and county and state.
Well, one of the things that crossed my mind, and because I was curious about this, I did a search for the use of the word may, M-A-Y, in the charter. And I've forgotten the number now, but I mean, it's several hundred uses of the word may. You may do this. Well, may is, of course, is about as ambiguous as you can get, because you don't know the boundaries of may. When must I and when must I not? Let me just make an extreme example, just so I get a little bit better understanding of the powers. One of the responsibilities that the city of Annapolis has is to provide water and sewer. But as I was reading that language, it it didn't definitively assign that responsibility. Let me just throw out a very ridiculous point. Could the city all of a sudden say, listen, times are tough. We don't have the money. We're going to forget it on the sewer. We're going to take a pass. This year, we're just not going to process sewage. But my frustration is the fact that there's not those defined responsibilities that say the city must provide sewer or it must do something. And maybe it was my read of that. Maybe it's sitting in a code somewhere where they must do it. But you don't want, I don't think you want to give the politicians that kind of latitude that under stressful times or desperate times, they do things that you just flat out, it's not in the best interest of the city or the citizens.
Well, I would say this about that.
Okay.
It's really the council is acting on behalf of the citizens when it takes on a service, right? And the citizens decide that they don't want to pay any more taxes. They do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The council has to then decide with this finite amount of money, what services we're going to provide to the citizens. The citizens have said, we want police, we want fire, we want water and sewer. After that, it gets kind of sketchy about what the citizens want. But I would think, though, that the citizens have a lot to say to their alderpersons, what they're willing to pay for. And they kind of vote that way. So everything that the city provides is a may, meaning the city is acting really on behalf of the citizens who said, we want to do our own water and sewer. Now, if we didn't do it, the county would assume it and we would pay taxes to the county for that benefit. What happens with a lot of municipalities is they decide, look, we've got a smaller geographic area. I think we could take it over. And then we write a letter to the county saying, hey, county, don't tax us for water and sewer. We'll tax ourselves and you do not have to provide it. And the county says, whew, thank you. Great, you do it. And that's really all that happens between the county and municipality. But the county, if we didn't do it, the county would offer it. They'd have to offer it because that's part of public safety, but they would also tax everybody at whatever area, either real estate or income taxes, in order to cover that service.
Okay, fair enough, thanks. Any other questions? Jeff, did you have your hand?
Well, I was just going to follow up on Michael's last point there. So in general, should we sort of flow with that, that point you just made in terms of the relationship to services in the city with the county, that if the city ever backed out, it's a given that the county would step in, or vice versa, that then when the city says we're going to take this on, the county is, more apt than not to say go for it.
Yeah, the county would have to take it on just because that's, water and sewer is like that, right? Mm-hmm. There is a lot about water and sewer that you can't have it break down without affecting the county and everybody else in the county outside of the city boundaries. Mm-hmm. So the county would more or less take it over, but it would have to be a discussion and a negotiation with the citizens' representatives who are on the council. They wouldn't just say, give it all to us. They'd say, okay, city, with your tax dollars, you fix all the things that are wrong, and then we'll take it over, right? So the citizens generally have to get in their minds, which a lot of us don't, that this stuff costs real money. And as it gets more expensive, you're gonna have to pay for it if you want it to operate fully. If you want to transfer things back to the county is not going to take it. I'm talking real world stuff. They're not going to take your problems. They'll take a well-functioning water and sewer, but if you've got broken pipes, busted pipes, things that don't work, streetscapes that are messed up, the county will say, pay all that off. I don't care what you got to do. Then when it's all ship-shape, we've inspected it, it's at 100%, then we'll take it. And then they'll send a letter to all the citizens that, hey, we've taken over water and sewer. Here's your water and sewer bill for the county. And your taxes, oh, by the way, are going to go up a penny per every $100.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence? To that point, to this discussion, I would add that the city of Annapolis had a water and sewage plants before the county did. For example, a few years ago, the county conferred with the city to process sewage on city property, which is located off of Edgewood Road. The city water supply comes just outside of the city and has been in use for over a century. And because the path of the water goes through the county into the city, there was an arrangement made whereby those people who lived in the county tapped into the city's water with some type of agreement between the two jurisdictions. So that situation that Mike is describing can work both ways. But I just wanted to make the point that this is something that has been done for a number of years. And the other point was to say that the city of Annapolis has usually been in the forefront of providing these types of services, whereas the county came along later on and said, oh, this is good. We don't have to build a brand new one. We'll use yours. Little history lesson.
Questions? Any more questions for Mike Lyles?
And I'm always available to answer questions. You can just submit them to Jacqueline. If she can't answer them, we'll do whatever research is necessary and get back to you in writing.
Very good. Well, we would like to work very, very closely with you on this. We want to make sure that the ship is heading in the right direction. We don't want to spend all this time and then have a report with recommendations. And we talked about this in our first meeting, that would just wind up in the file cabinet, and never see the light of day. So we really want to do a very worthy, good project, the one that we all can be proud of.
Sure. We appreciate that so much. Appreciate your service. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Is that all for me?
Yes, all for yes. Thanks
Great.
again.
Have a good meeting. Thank you.
Yes,
Bye.
Okay, we have, I see the clock is deep right now, as I like to say. We have an interest to, if we could quickly go through the work that each of the groups have done, at least to date. And this is more an attempt to try to sketch out what your thinking is. I think when we get to essentially the next meeting, I think what we're quite frankly looking for is more specific proposals, more specific ideas and concepts. But this one was an attempt to try to get you to at least think and dig into these ideas and concerns in the respective sections that we're each looking at. So I'm going to take these, and they're not quite numerical order, but close to it. And I guess it would be Ron on the preamble and the general provisions.
Right. So I have not met with the minor yet. I don't think he's at the meeting today.
No, he's not.
And there's I'm trying to look at get my notes here. It mostly was comments on the preamble, and I had talked at a couple of the past meetings about maybe making some kind of a statement, about the kind of city we want to be and how we want to treat our citizens and our employees, and our commitment to as a waterfront community to sustaining our community by addressing and mitigating the impacts of global warming, sea level rise, and pollution on our city. So that was kind of the gist of the comments on that first section.
Okay.
Is it? And I guess my question is that appropriate in this document to do that, or not? Is that someplace else that appears on the city's webpage? My thinking is I think the charter is an opportunity to kind of define who we want to be.
And I agree with that. I've had discussions individually with some of you, and I agree with that theme, or at least that approach. But having just listened to Mike, I'm now starting to wonder exactly, do I have the right color of what the charter actually is and what it's intended to be? Is it much more of a kind of a procedural document that's used? Procedural is not the right word, but it's much more of a directional document as opposed to a visionary document, something that really is kind of the bedrock of law or of decisions or how decisions are made.
One of the things I got from his discussion was, you got the charter, then you got the code. And it seems to me that if there's some statements in the charter that will help inform and direct as the code is written and changed, I think that may be important. So that's my thinking there. If we could provide
Okay.
some guidance to how the code and then the regulations unfold beneath that.
Do we have comments on that? Because I know this is a pretty, I think we really need to decide this right now to make sure we're all heading in the right direction, especially as we go through this outreach. Any comments? Ben? Yeah, I saw your hand. Yes.
I'll go back to the importance of preambles in general. And I know Andy, you and I had this conversation a month ago. But reading the charter, we've already sort of decided that it's an old document, that it's lengthy, that there's minutiae in there that we don't understand. And we've had discussions about whether we should deal with minutiae or not. And I feel that, if you look at the document holistically, it reflects a fairly well-developed city. Okay. Things have been added over the years to, as Mike described, empower the citizens of the city to have certain authority through the council and or through the code, I should say. And it's not like we're going to come up with some additional power at this stage in the city's development. I think that's revolutionary, right? I think the last big structural issue in the city was 10 years ago with the city manager role, just from a structural perspective. So I think that what I heard from Mike actually reinforces what Ron is proposing, in that the charter is a starting point for the authorization or the empowerment of the city. I think we could have a discussion, and I hope we might agree that the city is very well developed. It has a police department, it has sewer, it's empowered to do all these things. I mean, it's very empowered at this point. And unless anyone's coming to the table with a significant structural change, I think the times kind of call for an incorporation of guidance, or what we're calling visionary, while respecting the articles that exist, meaning the authorities that have already been established by the charter in the past. I would just add to that, I think the times really do call for it, because things are changing very, very rapidly, from environmental, which has been brought up, to justice and management of public systems. So if we were able to take this pre-existing document and provide guidance of empowerment, which I think is best done in preambles, whether for the whole document or per article, I think that would be doing a great service to the city this time around.
Further discussion on this?
I would only add, I like the idea. I'm looking at the preamble now. It's a single paragraph. It's very straightforward. It's very bureaucratic. Probably written in about 1800. And that's just fine. I don't have any significant disagreements with Ron or Ben's point. I only, wonder how. I'm not a big fan of going through this, I think, section by section and writing a preamble. I do like the idea of expanding the existing preamble to bring it up to, as I guess Ben said, modern times or something like that. So I do like that idea. I'm not a big fan of doing each one. I mean, I think that's a lot of work that we ought to be able to do in the opening preamble of our charter.
Jeff.
So I'm in violent agreement with Ron. I do, as I think about Mike's, comments and education to us, the thing that I'm struggling with is, okay, so we put these preambles in place, we put one preamble in place, and we talk about sustainability and addressing global warming or sea level rise, however you want to. It's all kinds of things we could address. Or what good will it do outside of the fact that it will be in a preamble if it's not giving direction or not motivating the council to actually go and make changes to the code or to take the next step?
Well, I don't believe that that's the purpose of this commission. I think that the purpose of the commission is to amend the charter, not legislate. And
I agree.
The amending of the charter is probably best driven by the research we do by reaching out to the community, talking with the city, and hashing out all those ideas into some recommendation format. So, I mean, for me personally, I'm not looking even one step beyond the final delivered recommendation. That's up to the people and the politicians. But I do think that things like preambles and statements of intent have long-lasting effects for good or bad. I mean, it could be that by working on that language today, we actually handcuff future politicians that might want to do something in reverse of what the people today think. So I think you kind of have to let the ship float and have faith.
And if I could just add, because we do have to move on, but add really to Jeff's point, what I see something like this being, and when Ben and I talked about this, I used the analogy, the nautical analogy of essentially the rudder and the tiller. The preamble essentially gives you the principles. It gives you the direction you're headed. It doesn't tell you how you're going to do something or that you have to do something, but it sets out some guidance to say, here are some basic principles that you need to follow. Future politicians may come along and decide, well, I want to do something completely different. It gives the electorate at least the opportunity to go back and say, now, wait a minute, you're kind of rubbing up against some of these principles. Now, the principles they're not enshrined in law. They're not binding law as much as they are direction. As I said, it's the kind of the tiller and the rudder. It says we're headed in this direction. So it's more, you could argue that it's philosophical, but it's really not, should never be the intent of principles, is to share philosophy. But the principles essentially lay out your guidance, and it should hopefully tell the politicians and the electorate too, that this is what this city is all about. This is the meaning of the city.
Fair enough.
Okay, can I, I'm going to watch the clock carefully because I don't want to cut into everybody's beverage hour, although I've got to stay off it. I'm taking the big medication now. Number two, Rob and Paul were working on elections. Do you want to just give us a thumbnail on where we are there?
Sure. So Paul and I met and we basically reviewed, a lot of the comments that people had already made in the document that Eileen has been curating for us. And we just kind of went through those comments to kind of create a laundry list. And now after talking with the city attorney, realizing that maybe, Paul, we should have, or we can go back and divide these things between things that would be charter amendments, right, versus code amendments, which we are under our charter, under the, the charter, we are obliged to also, comment on the code as well. So, so to that end, I'm going to go over this laundry list really quick, things that we put together, and I'll note where I think some things are probably going to be charter, whereas most of the items on here are going to be code related. So first, there's the issue of the elections to be to fully conform with state election code. Eileen has been very helpful with us and has provided us with a document that the city has been using in regards to this particular issue. So it's something that Paul and I can review and be able to bring back a little bit more specifics about this particular issue. So this is probably more of a code issue, obviously. Should elections for mayor and city council be nonpartisan? This is, this was an issue for the previous Charter Review Commission. I think it's kind of been an ongoing question for the city. This is definitely a code issue. This is also would be a code issue, would be whether or not a winning candidate for office should be required to win 50% plus 1% of the vote, right? Right now, if there's 3 candidates in a race, one of the candidates can win election by getting 34% of the vote, right? So do we want to require anyone who's going to win an election actually has to win with, 50% plus 1 of the vote? Once again, this is a code issue. Should we consider a ranked choice election process, or it's also known as instant runoff? Should we consider some emergency powers for the Board of Supervisors of Elections for certain situations, such as with the pandemic, basically trying to address the pandemic issue and maybe offer some specific language in the code to make dealing with these sorts of situations easier in the future? The question of election dates, should we move our election dates to coincide with other elections like statewide or presidential? If we want to keep Annapolis elections off year, in the off years though, do we want to maybe move up our primary date to earlier in the year? Should a signature requirement be mandated for all mail-in ballots if it's not already required by the code? This would actually be a charter amendment, I believe, should we expand the Board of Supervisors of Elections from 3 to 5 people? And if so, how are we going to make sure all parties and both major party, minor parties, and unaffiliated are represented on this Board of Supervisors? Right now, it's only specified Republican, I believe 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. So the idea is, do we want to amend the charter that would require someone who is not a Republican or not a Democrat to be appointed to the board? Now, I will put out here, this is a stretch one for a lot of folks. I realize this. I actually submitted this one. I'm not going to take offense. I know it's quite controversial. But should lawful permanent resident non-citizens be allowed to vote in city elections? That would be a charter amendment. By the way, Tacoma Park does allow that. Let's see, should a population-based procedure, so changing how the number of wards are determined. This would be a charter amendment. Right now, the current charter limits the number of wards to 8 unless the city annexes additional land. So do we want to consider including a method in the charter by which the city could expand the number of wards in the city? And then finally, this would be a code a change. Should we specify a signature requirement for petitions that are submitted for a ballot question? Right now, if you as a citizen want to put a question on the ballot, let's say a charter amendment, or you want to, repeal some code or something like that that was passed by the council. It's very ambiguous at this moment, I believe, in the code in terms of how many signatures you actually need in order for that ballot question to be put on the ballot. So that's kind of our laundry list. And when Paul and I talked, we both agreed that this would be, obviously not tonight, but maybe in future discussions, the group would maybe want to whittle down some of this laundry list and say, let's focus on, maybe 3 or 4 of these items that we think would be really important. And then that would help kind of focus Paul and I's efforts in terms of researching and interviewing folks and things of that nature, and drafting, language and drafting recommendations. So that's our report.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any thoughts? I think because of the hour, we won't do comments right now, but any thoughts, further thoughts that we may pass along to Rob and or Paul? Okay, that said, respecting time, we will move on to powers. Ron, that's you and I.
So
And I
you
was
and I
gonna-
had, you had some comments. I don't know if you wanted to go over those comments on this section, or
Why don't we just very quickly go through, because you and I had a back and forth on
Right.
this thing, and we can refine it probably further, because I think I learned a lot with Mike Lyles
Mhm.
actually spelling out what the function of the charter is.
Yeah, so I think we both agree that this section kind of lacks clarity. It seems to just, wrap all powers, we can do anything that's not prohibited by the Maryland Constitution. So, maybe some little direction on what does power mean and where is it exerted? And you'd also commented about the clarity between city and county, and I think that Mike addressed that in
Yes, he
his
did.
discussion about agreements. And then you get to this long section, and I've talked about this before, about all the enumerations of what powers the city has. And, it's quaint, it's historic. But there's a lot of things in there that if somebody were actually a citizen were reading this charter, they go, well, I have no idea what they're talking about. And why is that in a charter in 2021? So I think there may be some opportunity there. And I'd commented on this before, but and I have no experience with city charters, but I have lots of experience writing policies and procedures for large corporations. And so sometimes it's better to be more encompassing and less specific, because to the extent that you enumerate, and as they do in this section in the charter, 20 or 30 or 40 things, it's kind of lost. And there's always the possibility that you've missed something, and somebody's going to say, well, the charter didn't specifically say I can't do that. So I think there's an opportunity there to kind of clean that up a little bit, at least make it a little bit easier to understand, and perhaps get rid of some of the things in there that clearly don't apply in 2021. And then you had some comments on the annexation and property.
Yeah, it was more of an editorial comment. It wasn't clear to me why and maybe Jacqueline knows this, but why the concept of annexation is included in the charter. I'm not disagreeing with it. It's kind of an odd thing and maybe it goes back to Mike's point that says at least the power is there. So if it ever happens, then you could always say, well, the power was there, so we're allowed to annex, this particular piece of real estate or property.
The authority comes from the state, and the annexation process is actually governed by the state, much like the adoption of charter amendments. So we can annex land, and there's full process of doing that. And I think that's really why it is in the charter as opposed to in the code. It's really under state law.
Okay. This section 7B was a comment that I tossed out, which is the sale of property, or property is a very content-free word. The sale of a physical asset or a real asset. and again, there don't seem to be adequate guardrails that sit within the charter in terms of the ability to prevent a fire sale, so to speak, a fire sale, lowercase f. It just, you've got good assets, you've got land or whatever, and some council's not going to make, not going to balance the budget, so they wind up selling property. I think, which is, of course, anybody knows anything about finance, that's an absolute no-no. You don't never sell capital to pay for an operational expense. I would like to see, or I'd like to propose that there at least be some guardrails when assets do get sold, that it is used usually to buy, believe it or not, another asset. So you actually keep the assets. And it's interesting. It would never, I don't think we'll ever get elevated to the Annapolis Charter, but really the ownership of the asset really are the people. And actually the rights that are supposed to be sitting in a lot of documents belong to the people, belong to the citizens, as opposed to, the city itself. But I think, again, listening to Mike, I don't think we're probably going to run down that particular path. He did answer my water and sewer questions. I had raised that only because it just wasn't clear to me whether the city could abandon that responsibility, because it did say it may do it. And I just don't understand, oftentimes don't understand the word may, because it doesn't give you any guidance of when you can or can't do something. Let's see, Ron, this is yours. It is silent on communications. I can only presume. Oh, no. Oh, no, that's mine. That's mine. Oh, yeah, because it talks about utilities. It talks about water and sewer, but it doesn't talk about communications, which is, of course, that's the sector I'm in. And I understand the state of Maryland. I understand the United States structure in terms of communications. The state of Maryland has a Public Utility Commission, and they probably regulate or manage communications infrastructure. But what is happening really in the industry right now is this thrust about the safety valuations of 5th generation mobile. There's an awful lot of chatter around the world in terms of, is 5G safe? And it's not what you carry in your pocket, it's the tower that you've put somewhere. And if the state has this responsibility, then I'm not sure. And again, now I'm getting confused with, Mike explaining the role of the state versus the city, or, where is the dividing line, something like that. So I just raised that point. It just seems like there ought to be some role the city plays, where the city might say that, quite frankly, we don't want 5G. And maybe the Historic Commission is the vehicle that would be used to prevent a lot of 5G towers. Okay.
We do actually, we have an ordinance about the 5 gig towers. We just had legislation on that.
You do?
Yeah.
Good for
It
you.
went to the Planning Commission, and yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, it was just, as I read the charter, it just seemed like you covered utilities and then you didn't cover communications, which was, is kind of a burgeoning utility right now. That's about it. We have a couple of other things, but I think in respecting time and the hour, can we move on to topic 4, which is operations? Paul, Ben, and Eileen.
Who's going to lead? Is Eileen with us?
She is.
Eileen actually had to step away. So I don't think she'll be returning.
Okay.
tonight.
Okay. Then I'll and Paul, you can pipe in as well, but I'll tell you what I know. I know that with regard to reviewing the operations section, we all got our review and questions in. I don't know if Eileen compiled them with everyone's comments, so I didn't come prepared tonight to review prior comments on the section, but I know that Paul, you got your points and questions in on that article, as did I. And I know that, I bit off more than I can chew with my questions, because Eileen had a meeting on Monday with I forget the lady's name, but I believe she oversees or the commissions of the city. That was sort of like a starting point, I suppose, for understanding at least some of the operations. I know that out of that particular meeting, Paul, you and I had sort of started down the path of maybe we should explore the number of commissions and groups out there and cleaning that up and defining that better and sunsetting, which there doesn't seem to be much of as it relates to those types of operations. So that's what I know off the top of my head.
That's good. That's fine. I think let's leave it at that because this may be a work in progress. I know the next one, which is finance, Jeff and I had a back and forth. That's also a work in progress. So, and I'm going to look down to City Council and Mayor, which is sections 4 and 5. And that's Eileen and Minor, who are not with us.
Mr. Chair, Andy, can I
Yes,
just
sir.
ask you just real quickly? I just wanted you guys, you and Jeff, when you're doing this, are you looking at that borrowing power number? Is that one of the things you're looking at? I think they have 10 million or something in there. The only question I had was, these are 10 years, they developed these numbers 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Are they relevant today? That's, or should they be raised? And that's a charter issue for sure.
Yeah, we definitely, I think you had captured that when we were collecting all of our input. And, I've downloaded the city charters for about 6 or 7 different cities in the state of Maryland. And so I feel like I've got a good basis to do from a research perspective. The other thing, again, that's big on my craw is balanced budget and what's been the guidance across the state. So we'll look at that borrowing limit as well.
Okay, Paul, does that address your question? Okay, fair enough. Items 4 and 5 were the City Council and Mayor. That was Eileen and Minor, who were not with us. Items 8 and 9 are charter chapter numbers 8 and 9 deal with personnel and miscellaneous, and that was Ben and Paul.
And thank God we took miscellaneous because that means all the junk and Paul and I have yet to discuss it. So can we punt this to the next meeting and we'll
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Even the activity was.
I guarantee you there can't possibly be something in miscellaneous that's going to rock.
No, this is the next one didn't even have a section number. This is Lawrence's, and I didn't know how to write it, so I said missing parts. I didn't know, but it's really the catch-all that is trying to, what's not there that should be there. And like I said, I think it was great that we had the conversation with Mike, because now all of a sudden this is now taking on at least a little bit different context with me. I'm not so sure I have any further answers than I had 2 or 3 hours ago, but Lawrence, do you want to add anything at this point on the missing parts?
Sure. Now, some of what I might state here might be redundant. We've talked about some of these things to some degree. For example, annexation. There is some statements in the charter regarding the need to select a new alderperson to represent any property that is annexed to the city. I think that's pretty clear. It's pretty straightforward, but it should be probably reviewed thoroughly to ensure that that does take place. And I brought that point up because there are a few issues regarding annexation between city and county. And at our last meeting, I stated one, which was the annexation of property where the Annapolis Mall is and some of those areas regarding the parole master plan. So just something we should kind of keep our eyes open and try to be aware of any annexation issues. Now, this is one that I don't know what category or what article it may fit in, but security of our city's assets. And I titled this one Cybersecurity. As we read through and listen to our news, we hear about a lot of these facilities being attacked with these cybersecurity smart fellows. So I think that I stated here the charter does not currently address these methods. And I believe that is because this is a new day regarding cybersecurity issues. But we need to ensure that our water supply, our electric grid, and our communication systems are protected. And to me, that might come under the systems that the cities, I think the deputy fire chief heads up this section of the city or those types of issues. Whenever there's a city emergency, he's supposed to have a plan on how to do these types of things, how to get people out of the city, how to avoid the floods that take place downtown and all of that stuff. But so that issue of cybersecurity, I think, should be addressed in any future amendments to the charter or the code wherever it may best fit. And we also need to ensure that our city has an up-to-date virtual communication. You know, we depend on that a lot today. We're doing it right now, for example. But the days for speaking on the phone and telecommunications, all of that is pretty much leaving us. So we need to have a plan whereby we can contact the essential leaders of the city to determine what needs to be done in the case of an emergency. So the protection of those types of assets is essential and something that I believe should be addressed. We have a lot of issues coming up in the council regarding rental properties and things of that nature. We need to ensure that our city charter and the codes are up to date in terms of how we regulate and enforce all of the codes related to these subjects, whether we call them rental dwellings or rental units or whatever the new titles may be. We have a lot of people who have garages that they rent out in June to the midshipmen's families. And we have, I read where a lady has what is called a carriage house that she has been renting out for a number of years. And it's fine with her neighbors and all of that, but are they really complying with the city code? Is the city getting any money for renting these types of places, and the taxes and those types of things? And lastly, we want to ensure that our charter ensures that our city public school system is supported thoroughly. We most of us live in the city know that the city really doesn't regulate any of the schools. That's all done by Anne Arundel County school system. But there are probably 7 or 8 schools who form a group, and we have to ensure that the county pays attention to these group of schools to ensure that the kids living here get the best education that is possible. And that's kind of what I believe might be addressed to the chairman's point about what's left or what's missing or whatever. These are some things maybe not missing, but should be reviewed and addressed. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. That was very, very good. Any further thoughts that we'd like to share with Lawrence on this? This is the missing parts.
I'd like to ask a question of Jackie, if possible, based on what one of the things Lawrence talked about, and maybe help me to better understand the difference between code and charter. So Lawrence brought up this issue of cybersecurity rightly. it's a great issue. So Jackie, in your mind, when Lawrence says this, that we ought to be better prepared for, to prevent problems or to deal with problems with cybersecurity, and this is, I'm just asking you your opinion. To your mind, does that rise to the charter level, or is that a code issue, or is it potentially both?
Or worse, either.
That really, cybersecurity is handled by our MIT department, and they're always working with the administration on new methods of updating our cybersecurity. We get training, employees get virtually monthly training on cybersecurity. It's an online training program. And then they're also purchasing things throughout the budget process to protect the government.
And if I could just extend to the question to you, Lawrence, does that mean, are you satisfied with that answer, or do you feel like this is a charter issue as well? And I ask this not to say yes or no to this cybersecurity issue, but just to get your view.
It's Paul, it's pretty close. I was just more concentrating on those critical parts of the city that I stated. The water supply, the electrical grid, the substation where we get our power. We hear so often about what has happened in other cities throughout the nation. So I would hope that somewhere in the charter or the code, wherever it is appropriate, these issues are directly addressed, not just saying somebody's being trained somewhere, but do we have someone in the emergency management guru, Jackie, I forget his name, he's the deputy fire chief, right?
Yes, we do. Office of Emergency Management, the police, they all have separate systems apart from the general city hall. They have some very enhanced firewalls and security protocols and procedures and software.
Okay, I would hope that they would have the firewalls is a good way to look at
yes,
that. But I would
absolutely.
hope that they would have not only protection, but in the case of a failure, do they have a plan to get us back up and running? The whole picture.
So this is one of the, excuse me, this is Ron. I so much agree with this. I had made myself a note about cyber. So in the section about enumeration of powers, maybe we can replace fix the size of bread with the city has the power to, and cybersecurity, those kinds of issues. A really short statement, but bring it maybe back up to the at least the last century. So and then it could flow from there into code.
Don't get rid of the bread thing.
You say that, but then our electrical grid will maintain its integrity, but the local bakers union will plug the sewer system with loaves of bread. So
have you bought bread from Giant? Come on, there's no wheat in that bread.
I would agree with that. I think that these larger utility and infrastructure issues could be dealt with in that way, and I do see the general statements of them as charter level. That these are the areas that the city could be empowered to deal with, and then of course the city has to run with that via the council and the code. So,
and again,
I share that view.
Of course, it'll raise budget questions, but I don't think that that's the purview of this commission. So,
I reinforce that point because this is the 21st century, or what is it? Yeah. And when the last charter was reviewed, we did not have these issues.
Okay, that was actually very, very good. I have views, but again, I'm looking at the clock, so I think we'll hold these to hopefully the next meeting. Are there any other discussion points that we have that we'd like? I was actually going to talk about outreach, but we've already talked about outreach, so we've covered that. Anything else we would like to raise in this meeting?
I have a follow-up question that maybe we can, maybe Andy, you can go back to Mike on, or maybe we can discuss it in our next meeting after further review of the articles. We've talked a lot tonight about empowerment and authorization and may. I'd be interested in legal opinion and our own opinions on prohibitions and may nots and what that role might play in a charter. And
Okay.
guidance thereof.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are no may nots in there, are there?
I don't know.
Yes, yeah, there are. Yeah, in
Oh, okay.
section 3. In
Oh.
section 3, yeah.
Well, but maybe I thought you were talking about what the city may not do.
Oh, no. This is what the citizens may not do.
Well, right, in Article 3, but
I mean, you can't be a vagrant. I mean,
Right.
you can't, or you can't public drunkenness. I mean, it's goes on and on. But Ben, that's an interesting point. And let's keep that to the next time. And I'm not exactly sure how to put my mind totally around that, because when you have the maze, when you have this is permitted and this is not permitted, then you start constraining things. You create structure, you create finite structure that you can do this, but you can't do that. And then a very, very well-known Federal Reserve economist once told me, he said, no sooner than we can put, this is the Federal Reserve, no sooner than we can put a regulation on the books for national banking, literally within minutes, banks will figure out a way around it. That it's just the nature of regulation, unfortunately, at least the Fed kind of regulation. Okay, so I've written that down, Ben, as being something that will carry over to the next meeting. Just one final thing. This is really a recap. Next meeting, we'll go back through each of these 8 points and try to drill down deeper. I know Jeff and I are going to work on the finance stuff. We're going to, and I think there's several others that I think we probably need to push a little bit harder on. And also I think there are others that where we've got a fair amount of information. It's just a matter of circulating it. I'll upload. So I have some election material that I'll share. Make sure that both Rob and Paul get that. These are just more articles or descriptions of systems that are used, of different kinds of approaches around the world of, how do you in fact elect people? Can I ask if there might be a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
May I request? Oh,
So moved.
any objection?
Second.